Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Wild from ProWritingAid. Thank you for joining us for another session in the ProWritingAid Ask a Book Doctor series. As ever, my guest for tonight, my co-host really, is Sally Orson-Jones. Not Sally Jones, as I just mentioned, but Sally, in fact, Sally OJ, as we know and love her. How are you doing tonight, Sally?
Doing great, Tom. Thank you. Lovely to be here as always.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, so Sal, today we are talking about fan fiction, and I feel that we need a fanfare to talk about fan fiction because it is one of our most requested topics. And I know you're not going to disappoint. You've got a lot to talk about on this subject, but it is something that lots of people have been asking about, and I'm expecting lots of good questions. Let's kick off with a very quick, I'm expecting most people to know this, but let's have a very quick definition or just summary of what fan fiction is.
Absolutely. And I think, as I said last month, when we were sort of flagging this, this is a subject that I actually feel really strongly about. I feel that a lot of very good books fall by the wayside because of a lack of understanding by both editors and writers of how to convert fan fiction. So I'm really excited about tonight. So I'm sort of assuming that most people here, or everyone here, knows what fan fiction is. But on the off chance that somebody is sitting there going, I don't know what anyone is talking about, let's briefly explain. Fan fiction is when a fan of a show or a book or a film or a sport or anything decides that they want to take the story further. And the example that I always use is Friends, because Friends is a very good fan fiction show because it's got an ensemble cast. There's boys, there's girls, everyone's very attractive, and it's hugely popular. So it's a very good example. So say you're a fan of Friends and you absolutely love it, but you feel that it, that when that door closes, you want that scene to go on. So the first kind of fan fiction is really, 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 really simple. It's just continuing the story or adding to the story or building around the story. It's exactly like Friends. Rachel is with Ross. They live in the same apartment. It's all the same, and it just carries on. And I think we might as well be very upfront right at the beginning of this chat and say that what most people here know is a vast amount of fan fiction has got very sexual content. So it can often be, once that door closes, once Rachel and Ross go into the bedroom, then the scene will carry on. But it's not by all means all sexual. And I think we'll talk about this a bit later, but fan fiction has got quite a bad reputation. And one of the reasons it's got quite a bad reputation because everyone thinks it's pure filth, and it isn't. So that's the first kind of very simple kind of fan fiction. The second kind is when it starts to get a bit more creative. So you're a big fan of Friends, you love Friends, but you think that Rachel should be with Chandler. You don't really think she fits with Ross. So you write your own version of Friends. It's not exactly like it is on the show, but in your version, Ross is with Chandler. Well, yeah, that happens too, and that's what I was just coming to. Rachel is with Chandler, or Ross is with Chandler, or Rachel is with Monica, because this is actually one of the quite interesting things about fan fiction. Long before it became trendy, gender pairings were much, much more fluid in fan fiction, and straight people were writing gay pairings, and gay people were writing straight pairings, and that's quite an interesting phenomenon, but not what we're here to talk about tonight. So it's all the same, it's all Friends, but you've mixed the people up. It's not. Then you get what is called AU fan fiction, which means alternative universe. And that's when Ross is with Rachel, or Ross is with Chandler, or Ross is with, Monica. No, that would possibly, I'm sure that exists actually. But the writer has decided that they like it a bit better when Rachel is a brain surgeon and Ross is a carpenter. So it's not set, well, it might still be set in their apartment, but it's all different. And often it's not even set on the same set. It's it's moved to Seattle, it's moved to London, but you know, it's the same characters, and you'll find the same cast coming in and out. Joey will be there, Monica will be there, but it's alternative universe. And that is, of course, what the most famous example of fan fiction, which is 50 Shades of Grey, was. It's AU Twilight fan fiction. And she took, I can't remember what they're called, Bella and what's his name from Twilight. And
I'm sure someone can help with that.
Sure, everyone will help us. And just move them into this completely different setting.
Edward.
Thank you, Edward. Why can I sometimes see these and sometimes not? Anyway, Edward, yes. And move them into this. But it was still absolutely those characters. And I believe, because I've never watched Twilight, but I believe that if you read 50 Shades, you can still very clearly see those two characters, even though they're not called Bella and Edward anymore. And then you get the last kind of fan fiction, which is where people focus more on the actors and actresses themselves, the real people. And I
never knew about this one. This is an interesting one.
And so they write fan fiction about, you know, what happens on the set, or again, they take it for you know, into a completely different situation, you know, make up completely different stories, but with I'm trying to think of the name of the actors from Friends, with David Schwimmer and Jennifer Aniston in you know, being a brain surgeon and a carpenter, or you know, or themselves or whatever. But essentially it is limitless, and there is simply nothing you can think of, as you proved yourself, Tom, when I suggested you look it up, that cannot be fan fictioned and is not fan fictioned. Anything you can think of, there'll be not one or two or three, but thousands and thousands and thousands of fics out there. And it's an absolutely fascinating phenomenon. And the reason for me that it is so fascinating is that if you think, I spoke on a panel once about this, and at the time I spoke on this panel, Glee was a huge show. And Glee is, again, absolutely classic fan fiction kind of show, big ensemble cast, lots of pretty boys and girls. And I went on to one of the sort of hosting sites, which is where you usually find fan fiction. And I just put in Glee. And on this one site, on this one day, there were 48,000 fics. Wow. So if you think about, of course, a lot of them are written by, not all of them, but I mean, it's the same writers tend to, you know, write a lot of stuff, but not that much. So what is fascinating to me is that at any given time, all of these fics, which is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of fics, all these people are writing.
Yeah.
And they're getting their writing critiqued for better or worse, and they're getting feedback for better or worse, and they are stretching their writing muscles, or are they, for better or worse? And that is one of the reasons I became so fascinated, because although everyone here who's ever read any fan fiction will know, the vast majority of it is not very good and does not have to be very good. That's not the point. Some of it is absolutely exceptional, much better than 50 Shades of Grey, really exceptional standard of writing. And those are the ones that especially interested me, because those are the ones that I would love to see those authors. Well, I'd love to see all the authors coming, of course.
I get the sense, Al, from what you're saying, that it can actually be a like you said, I think you used the word to kind of flex your muscles. It can be a good place to hone your art, but you need to be careful, right? I mean, it sounds...
You do need to be very careful, and it is a very double-edged sword, writing fan fiction, because on the one hand, it's an absolutely safe space to write, and you're writing for people who want to read, who very specifically want to read exactly what you're writing. So you've got a captive and happy and eager audience. And traditionally, you know, fics are dripped out a chapter at a time. So you've got people really, you know, hanging on and waiting. Then you've got just the free rein to sort of let yourself experiment, let yourself push yourself,
Right.
all these kind of things. It's absolutely wonderful. But the flip side of exactly that is, however much you push or stretch yourself, you're not writing original characters. You're not often writing original stories. You're basically working with the story that's already there, and you are writing to an absolutely captive audience. So even if you've got a beta writer, which a lot of people do have, and even if you're getting critique, getting, you know, feedback and criticism, it's not ever going to be a detached criticism. And what happens is that more often than not, people get floods of absolutely fantastic feedback because they are writing exactly what people want. And this obviously is very addictive. It's you know, it's wonderful. So why tear yourself away from that and start writing something original? Why tear yourself away from this ready-made world and start writing something original? So that is one of the real pitfalls of writing fan fiction, is that you can get sort of stuck in this dopamine fix of it.
And that must partly feed the reason why people do want to convert their fan fiction, right? Because they've had such positive feedback. They feel very, you know, it's all been going really well. But I think what we're going to come on to talk about is the fact it's not necessarily an easy step, right?
Not so. For step, I'll take it sort of at the end bit of the not being an easy step is what we're going to talk about eventually tonight, which is the problems that beset you when you start doing it. Long before E.L. James, there were people who suddenly pulled all their fic off the hosting sites and said, I'm putting it on Amazon. I'm going to just change the name and I'm going to change the names, put it on Amazon. It's exactly the same fic, and I'm going to keep writing it, but the chapters are going on Amazon and I'm going to charge, you know, $1.99 for it. Always a very unpopular move. And people, well, no, you'd always get 2 or 3 people saying, yay, that's a fantastic idea, I'll buy it. And of course, that's great. But most people were like, no, that's not the deal. Fan fiction is free, and I've downloaded your fics, and I'm just going to keep those. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until 50 Shades that people thought, crikey, I'm sitting on a gold mine here. You know, I've got all these fantastic reviews. I mean, thousands of fantastic reviews for my fic. You know, I can just convert this and I'll make a fortune. I'll be like her. One of the things that everyone has to remember is the reason 50 Shades was so popular was not because it was converted fan fiction. It was because of the subject. It was people wanted to read about what Edward and what's her name got up to. That's one of the reasons it was so hugely, or the main reason, the specific reason it was so hugely popular. So, and what happened with her, as we've talked about, was a kind of a perfect storm of it all coming together. I have talked about 50 Shades before. I wish her the very best of luck, you know, but I am going to criticize the book because it falls into a lot of the pitfalls that we're going to talk about tonight. And I strongly feel that if she'd been edited by someone who understood how to convert fan fiction, it would be a much better book. Now, I've said this, it's fan out there. I've said this on a panel once, and everyone, well, not everyone, but some people laughed at me and said, haha, people don't care about the quality of the writing with 50 Shades, which I'm sure is true. But why not have it a better book?
Right.
Why not have your smut very well written? You know, what's wrong with it? And it could have been, you know, there could have been so much more there. And I feel for her because she got criticized a lot for the quality of the writing, and she'd only been writing what everybody wanted.
Yes. Right.
And somebody should have had the insight to say, we need to work more on this book before we put it out. I think you got a hit here, but we need to work more on it. And everyone knows the story of 50 Shades and how it, you know, got turned down and then someone had the force, you know, but And then the problem is when you actually come to do it, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Okay. So before we get into details, I just want to make a note, because a lot of the questions coming in are to do with the kind of legal situation and permission required and trademark and copyright, and we are going to touch on that. So we will get around to, I mean, I can see that a lot of people are, interested in that particular point. So
let's talk about that now.
Okay, great. Let's go straight in.
So, as anyone who has read fan fiction knows, there's always a little disclaimer at the top, which says something like, for some reason, Buffy has come to mind. This shows you how long ago I was looking into all of this, Buffy and Friends and Glee. Everyone will know that if you read fan fiction, there's a little disclaimer at the top, which words to the effect of, these characters belong to Joss Whedon, they're not mine, I'm just borrowing them, and this is not my original idea. And every single fanfic will have words to the effect of that. Some people will go into much more legalese, but basically that's what they put. And that does, because it's just impossible for writers to do anything about it. And some have tried, as we all know. Yeah. Anne Rice very famously tried. J.K. Rowling wasn't thrilled at first. But you just can't. It's impossible. You can't control it. So these legal, not legal things that have held. Yeah. When you convert it, now I remember once trying to find out about what the legal situation was with E.L. James, because obviously the characters were borrowed, and I couldn't find out. And I don't know whether it was just because I was putting in the wrong search terms. I haven't tried to do it for years, so it's probably all out there now. There's probably loads of articles about it now. But
that'd be interesting.
Just between you and me and the other 95 people here, what I think you have to do, it would be interesting, but I think you have to do is make sure that when you convert your fanfic, it is not recognizable. And it might be recognizable in a subconscious way. So somebody might read it and go, oh, I like this. It reminds me a bit of Monica from Friends. But they're not going to go, ideally, they're not going to go, this is just Monica from Friends. Then I think that is the way to trouble. So I think first of all, don't tell people it's converted fan fiction. I don't know how she got away with it. I think, the trouble is what's just occurred to me, she had to tell people because the fics were so popular. When it was a fanfic series, it was hugely popular. So there were thousands and thousands of people out there who knew about it. So I think she felt she sort of had to come clean or she would be outed. So I think if you're converting your fan fiction, this is something I hadn't even thought of before, something to add to the mix. I think perhaps you need to disguise it even more than we thought. Because
so the issue comes when you're, so just to reiterate, with fan fiction itself, it's very typical to use the disclaimer. And we're not giving that legal advice, but you don't need to, as far as we're aware, you don't need to source any kind of, there are no trademark or copyright issues provided you have a disclaimer. But what we're saying is you probably need to tread a bit more carefully when you're actually converting that into published works.
Yes, I think you must be. I think if you get a publisher or get an agent, you must come clean and talk to them about advice. I'm sure there are articles now about E.L. James and what she had to do. But I think the only answer is that at the agent stage, should you get an agent, just to absolutely come clean and say, this is converted fan fiction, this is what the show was, this is the characters, how should we play this?
Yeah.
And I had, 40,000 people liking it online already, sort of thing. If it's fic that hasn't gone up, if you've just written it for yourself and it hasn't gone up, then you're in a much easier position because you can just pretend it's not fan fiction.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. We talked earlier about a situation that J.K. Rowling faced where she initially was unhappy with a fan fiction story that had been converted and published, or was due to be published, but actually the weight of opinion from from the audience out there convinced her to change her mind, and she endorsed it. But I think every case is going to be different, isn't it?
Well, yeah, as I say, famously, Anne Rice was absolutely enraged by it.
Yeah.
And you can see why, actually. It's not, you know, on one hand, you love your fans and want them to love your work, but if they take your characters that you've put your blood, sweat and tears into and have them, you know, swinging off a chandelier, you know.
It's interesting you say that, Sal, because actually one of our questions from Loveford, so I'm sorry I don't know your name, but they said someone sent me their fan fiction on one of my books and I felt a bit stalked. Probably because I didn't know what fan fiction was, but it goes on to say, how do you handle it from a writer's point of view? That's quite interesting. I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, the trouble is, once your book is out there, and this is another point that, of course, we have to recognise, fan fiction has been around for a very, very long time. The Bronte sisters wrote fan fiction about the famous figures of their day, about royalty and about, you know, the sort of socialites of their day. There's a very famous example, which is Jean Rhys's book, The Wide Sargasso Sea, which is her take on the mad woman in the attic in Jane Eyre. She didn't like the way she was handled in that at all, felt she should have her say, and wrote a wonderful novel. That's fan fiction.
Yeah.
And there are lots and lots of people will be putting in chat lots of other examples of known, you know, the first recorded sort of as we know it now. I don't know why I keep doing this. What's one quote mark? It's pointless. As we know it now, fan fiction was Star Trek, the original Star Trek, the TV show in the 60s. And that was in a sort of Star Trek newsletter that was sent to fans, but by fans, a fanzine. And stories started appearing in there. And that is the first sort of acknowledged sort of modern fan fiction. So even that, you know, that's going back quite a while now, but it's been around. And the other thing I always think is we've got no idea how many successful books, successful films are actually just fanfic. And they've done it so well that we can't tell.
Yeah,
I wonder about that a lot.
And I think when you start to look at the size of the market, you can't help but wonder that. Yeah. Okay, so maybe from your experience, Sal, you know, you've worked on I think you've worked on with a couple of authors who've converted or looking to convert fan fiction. So anyway, what let's go through some of the pitfalls. What do you need to do? What's the, you know, the things to watch out for?
Well, I will start by telling you about, I've worked with quite a few people who've converted fanfic, but the two that stick in my mind are the very first one, which was before 50 Shades, long before 50 Shades. And it was a wonderful manuscript. It was a really good manuscript, and it was set in Paris. It was historical, a very good writer. And it was a story of, it was about two men falling in love. And it was absolutely fantastic until it came to characterization, which was absolutely non-existent. And I just couldn't understand it. I kept thinking, why is this really good writer? She can write so well. Why does it just fall through the floor when it comes to the characterization? And I was more than halfway through, and I suddenly had this sort of light bulb moment, which was, I thought, this is converted fan fiction. And more to the point, it was converted what they call /fic, which people out here might know, which is the word for when usually straight women write about two male characters. And which is hugely popular, by the way, /fic, hugely popular.
Yeah.
And I remember talking about this book once at panel, and I said, if it ever gets published, they should just put a sticker on the front saying, if you like /fic, you'll like this book. And everyone laughed, but I was absolutely serious. It's an untapped market. I was perfectly serious. Anyway, I asked the author, she denied it. I was so sure. I said, look, there's nothing to be ashamed of at all. Please tell me, because then I can help. If you tell me. And she eventually did say, yes, it was converted fan fiction. She wouldn't tell me what the fandom was, but she did admit. I just shouldn't say admit. It's as if there's something wrong with it, but she did come clean that it was.
Yes.
So that was the first time I noticed it. Right at the other end of the spectrum, did not have to be a genius for this one, was it was a story. The story, I'm not going to say because I don't want to obviously embarrass the writer, but there was a film that I hadn't even seen with an actor that I really knew very little about, but it was a big film. And I got not very far into this story when I thought, this is literally that film. And it's literally that actor. And the name had been changed, you know, from George to Gorge. And the situation had been changed very slightly. And instead of him being, you know, having a dragon tattoo in his left cheek, he had a dragon tattoo in his right cheek. You know, I mean, it was absolutely... And in that case, I had to say to her, look, I'm really sorry, but you just can't do this. This is impossible. And it was just like, you know, she changed the story a bit. Now, I'm not imagining that anyone here is going to do anything like that, but those are the two that really stuck in my mind. You can't just change the names and move a tattoo you know, I think hilariously, actually it had been moved from sort of Chicago to somewhere in the west of England, I think. But, you know, I don't know why I say hilariously. It was just sort of from very glamorous to not particularly glamorous. So now, of course, traditionally, as is traditional, I've forgotten what are the pitfalls you said to me?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And yeah.
See, I remembered.
Well done.
We're only, how many into it now?
13.
So the first thing, as I have already alluded to, which is absolutely crucial, is characterization, because when you're writing fanfic, you do not have to write characters. They're there for you. They're on a plate. And much more to the point, everyone who's reading your fan fiction knows these characters inside out. They know what they look like. They know their hobbies. They know what food they like to eat. They know that their grandmother died in a tragic canoeing accident. They know that their mother makes art out of bottle tops. They know literally everything there is to know about these characters. You have to do nothing. And people can, in fact, get a bit touchy if you start messing about with them as an author. They like to, you know, they want to read what they want to read, unless it's something that really taps in. And this is quite an interesting thing, that when I was sort of studying fanfic, sounds so weird, doesn't it? But when I was sort of studying fanfiction, I noticed that the different fandoms, and for those listening who don't know what a fandom is, it means the fans of a particular show. So you belong to the Glee fandom or the ER fandom or whatever, had different things that people liked. And, you know, the Twilight fandom had an awful lot of stories in the same vein as 50 Shades. This was, it sort of, something about the mood of a show, you know, picks up on the mood of the watchers. And so each fandom had sort of certain stories, certain tropes that came up over and over again, certain themes, and also, interestingly, the same use of language, the same use of devices. So if somebody, I always remember this one because it struck me, because it was coming up everywhere. There was one, I can't even remember what the fandom was now. I did a lot of reading one summer. There was somebody who had used this phrase, and blue eyes met brown, and with the two main characters, you know, and then suddenly all these other fics were using this phrase, his blue eyes stared into her brown eyes, and it was suddenly everywhere, because the people who were reading them were also the people who were writing them, and they thought, well, that's good. Yeah. You know, no one will notice if I slip that in as well. Or maybe they thought, who cares if people notice? And so it's weird about the things that pop up, because sometimes I can see them and sometimes I can't. And somebody just said, aren't you supposed to use headcanon? And yes, but it's also true that people sometimes really don't like headcanon. It's one of these things. It's headcanon means, you know, taking them and running with them, basically. Right. So not only the same sort of tropes turn up within one fandom, but also the same use of language, the same phrases, the same turn of phrase. So when you convert your fanfic, if it has been very faithful to that fandom's sort of genre, not, you know, tropes and use of language and idioms and everything, then that's going to possibly still crop up in your book, and that doesn't really matter in the wider sense, but it means that somebody who reads that fandom is going to go, hey ho, I've seen this before. Yeah. So that's, but characterization is what I'm trying to say. What I'm endeavoring to get to is a huge problem, and I have not yet seen a converted fanfic that doesn't need a lot of work on characterization.
Interesting. Okay.
Absolutely vital.
Right. Okay. So that comes back to that point you said, well, we were talking about earlier, probably that, you know, people are, yeah, you go from writing for an audience that know exactly what they want and know the subjects inside and out, to writing for the general public.
And that comes back to the second point, which is, or one of the many second points, which is shortcutting. Because when you're writing fanfic, there's so much you don't have to say because everyone knows it. You don't have to go into people's backstories unless it's part of the story. You don't have to go into. You don't have to. It's slightly different from characterization. It's all you know. Everyone knows where everyone lives. Everyone knows. Even if you take them AU, even if you change their jobs, people just know what's going on. And so that is another problem. The other thing, or one of the many other things, is that if in fan fiction, even if you go AU, if you do a Friends, Monica and Chandler AU fan fiction, Joey's going to turn up, Rachel's going to turn up, you know, they've turned up as other people in the hospital or whatever. But sometimes it can, if you convert it, these apparently very different characters suddenly turning up, not with Friends because they all fit together really well, but sometimes it can read quite oddly. It looks like this person's just there in a very random way, if you don't know the context. What are the other things that we talked about, Tom? Because my mind has gone blank now.
So
I know I was the one who said them all, but I can't remember. There are several.
One thing we talked about, which is kind of being aware of plagiarism. So, you know, if it's too similar, that could be, you know, you do need to be aware of that with the original author.
You really do. You really do. And you really do have to be. I mean, when I started, I had my summer of fanfic before 50 Shades, and that changed everything.
Yeah.
And I didn't, you know, what happened was I was becoming known as something of a sort of expert on fan fiction, and that I wasn't keen to be known as an expert on fan fiction, and I sort of backed away from it. Not that it doesn't still interest me, and not that I don't still care about the people who write fan fiction, because I really do. And I really care about, as I said right at the start today, about the fact that a lot of, I think, very good books just don't make it.
Yeah.
I don't get an agent, you know, because they're flawed in some way. Flawed, not quite the right word, but because they are not yet working in ways that can be very easily fixed. Yes. And I'm sure when we get to the questions, I'll remember other things that come up.
Let's do that, Sal, because time's ticking by and we've already got quite a few mounting up. But I do want to, before we go there, just pick on something that Jay Moogs has just said in chat, where they said, I feel very innocent. I knew about Star Wars fan fiction, but didn't realize to what extent. Right. This is exactly the situation I was in when I first talked to Sally about this. I don't mind admitting it. I knew nothing about this world. Sally introduced me to the world of fan fiction and set me a challenge. Come up with a couple of shows or books or anything that any subjects I can think of, things that I read or watched when I was younger, and find the fan fiction out there. And I did one very obvious one, a sci-fi story, sci-fi show that was around when I was younger called Blake 7. Many of you might know it, and predictably there's lots of fan fiction out there. But I also looked up a cartoon that I enjoyed as a child, and surprisingly there was also almost an equal amount of fan fiction written about this cartoon. Yeah, yeah. But Jay Moose goes on to say, I can literally feel the attraction of serial fan fiction because you get that feedback a chapter at a time. You know, that would spur you on to the next, perhaps combating procrastination writers. But it's a really good point.
Absolutely. And that has, in fact, reminded me of the other thing, which is you've got to write, if you're writing what you've got to do when you convert your fic, the first thing you've got to do is amputate it from the world of your fic. And you've got to almost forget it's converted fan fiction. It's the first draft of a book that you've got, and you've got to push that fan fiction world away, because what you've got to start doing is writing originally. You're not going to get this addictive dopamine rush of people clamoring for your next chapter and praising your next chapter. You're not going to get a certain assured audience. You're not going to get any of those things. And what you're not going to get is a readership who is just ready to take whatever you give them because they know what you're writing about. So you have got to, first of all, sever yourself completely from that world, get your head into the fact that this is the first draft of a book, and second, start pushing yourself creatively to write original stuff.
So this is no longer fan fiction. It's no longer that.
It can't be, because that way is the doom of your book. The fan fiction was the germ, the idea. Every book's got a starting point, a spark that started it. But now you have to like a bear chewing its own leg off when it's in a trap. You've got to pull yourself away from that and limp on. I so regret starting this. Limp on to your own story. I'm not going to keep hammering that metaphor.
Oh no, I love the ones we all do, Sal. Your metaphors and stories. I still haven't got over weasel's eggs. Anyway, let's go. Let's crack on with some questions. Okay, so starting right at the top, Catherine asks, I wonder whether alternate history featuring actual historical figures could be loosely considered a type of fan fiction.
I'm really so sorry. I was writing something down so I wouldn't forget it, and I missed most of that question. Could you repeat?
So I wonder whether alternate history featuring actual historical figures could be loosely considered a type of fan fiction.
Yes and no. I think, there's a very famous book, and now I can't remember the name of it. Everyone will tell me, and I thought of the name of it this morning, about Richard III, The Princes in the Tower. Is that what it's called? No, it's not called that.
I'm looking for help from our listeners here.
It's not called The Prince. It's an impassioned defense of Richard III,
right?
Saying he got, I think it was written in the 50s, maybe the 40s, saying that there's a detective, he's in bed, he's been injured, somebody brings him a book about Richard III, and he decides he's had a bad rap, and he decides to spend his convalescence. The Daughters of Time, thank you, Josephine Tay, which I said to you, did I not tell you about that book when we were talking the other day?
You did, and what interests me is Catherine is the same person that posted that question. So
there you go.
Yeah.
So that is definitely fan fiction, because Josephine Tay was, I believe, Catherine, a member of the Richard III Society. She was very, very passionate about writing what she considered a wrong, which surprisingly thousands and thousands of people still do feel today. And that, I think, you could definitely classify as fanfic. She was a fan of Richard III and wanted to put it right. A lot of historical fiction is historical fiction. That's not good. A lot of historical fiction is, in a very broad sense, fan fiction, because it's very often on a subject or a character in history that the writer is extremely, extremely interested in. And you'll find so many historical novels which focus on a particular character. There might even be series, and they you know, there was and that's because the author has become to a degree obsessed with that character, and why not? And that, I think, counts as fan fiction. Now, when you simply think, I'm going to set a novel in Tudor times because I like Tudor, you know, I like reading about Tudor stuff, I find it very interesting, and it'll be, you know, I can already see how, you know, the backdrop of the Restoration or whatever is going to be, you know, that's not fan fiction, that's just writing historical fiction. So it's and you can keep slicing this until it gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, look, let's move on to the next question. Laura asks, would you say that you see the characterization problem less when there is converted AU?
No.
Or a story that focused on side characters, which required more character building by the fan fiction author because they are less fleshed out in canon?
Well, that's a very good point. No, I said very quickly to your first point. AU, it's just, I mean, the one that was set in Paris, that was AU. I've got no idea what the original fandom was, but it was definitely AU. Yes, if you have to. I mean, this is the thing. I've probably worked on loads of books that started off with fan fiction. I just don't know it. We've all probably read loads of books. So I think if you have to work to bring more to those characters, then that can only be a good thing, surely. That can only be a positive thing, and makes you flex those muscles that you're not using when you're writing fan fiction. That's a good way of putting it, actually. I'm glad I thought of it. It's, you know, your muscles atrophy. Yes. A lot of your writing muscles atrophy when you write fan fiction, and you have to get them back up to full fitness.
Okay, so this links to an interesting question. Aistering, I don't know if that's your name, but that's your email address, sorry, but they ask, what motivates people to write fan fiction? It seems that the majority of people who write fan fiction don't really care about the kind of issues that professional writers do.
It depends on the writer. Yeah. I think a lot of at the absolute top of the pile, I think they do care very much, and the structure and everything about, you know, the writing is wonderful in so many ways. I was knocked out by some of the stuff I saw, absolutely knocked out. I thought these people must be, you know, they must become writers properly. They must publish. I say properly. I don't want to knock fan fiction. I don't consider it not proper writing. Yeah. But oh, I'm so sorry, Tom. Question?
No, it's a basic question about what motivates people to write.
Oh, what motivates? So there's three things that motivate. One is you're a writer and you love to write, and it's his way of writing that, and people are going to, you know, you're going to get a great response. One is you're obsessed with the show, and it's a way of exercising your obsession, and indeed exercising your obsession. It's a way of you know, being able to obsess about your show or your character it sort of legitimizes it in a way, though it's got a very bad rep. People consider people who write fan fiction to be crazy, and people usually keep very quiet about it. But within your community, it legitimizes it. And the third reason, which is actually less of a thing than people think it is people think they can write good sex scenes, and this is a perfect time to find out if they can. Though, as I said, a very high percentage of fanfic does have a strong sexual content, a very graphic sexual content, but which is something else you have to watch out for when you're converting it, actually. That's something else you have to be careful of. A lot of that just has to go. But the main motivating force, I think, is fandom, is being a fan.
Right.
I think that's the main motivating force.
Yeah, and so Laura has just added a couple of comments to chat, which I find quite interesting. And she says, I have to disagree. Fic writers write fan fiction because they're passionate about the characters and the original story. And that's certainly something
that is what I just said, isn't it?
No, I know we got to that.
I'm sorry, Laura. I apologize.
But to me, that's what I see as the overriding, thing, that this is allowing people who are really passionate about the story to provide their own ending or their own version for an audience that they know will give them feedback. It's but I don't know. I haven't ever written it, but I'm really interested by that motivation point.
It's fantastic, and it gives people a place. It gives people a community. It gives people a sense of validation. There's this horrible characterization of people who write and read fan fiction of, the whole thing about, lonely souls who live in their mother's basement and never go out. And truthfully, there is a very, very, very small element of that. But most people are, have got a perfectly happy, well-balanced people. They've got jobs, they've got friends, they've got family. And they write fanfic after their kids have gone to bed. It's not this this sort of weird thing. No one makes fun of people who collect stamps. That's a perfectly accepted hobby.
Yeah.
Spending your time poring over an album and getting your lips stuck together with stamp glue is considered perfectly normal. But and we could roll out all the hobbies, all the really quite odd hobbies that people just accept as being perfectly. And then there's this sort of gradient of what is considered weirder and weirder and weirder and weirder. And fan fiction is very much in the weird zone for whatever reason. But I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it gets people writing, and it gets people communicating, and friendships are made, international friendships are made.
Yeah. So, and Laura, I'm really enjoying your comments, by the way. And she's just said 100% community. So thanks, as usual, thank you all for contributing in the chat and with the conversations. It always adds a lot of validation and a lot of extra information and a different perspective as well. So yeah, thank you for that. Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. And I'm going back to one that was asked earlier by Jennifer. She said, is there a difference between fanfic and retelling? And she says, what about Marissa Mayer's Lunar Chronicles? So I can't comment specifically on that, but do you know it, Sal?
I don't.
No.
You mean overtly retelling of a story?
I assume so, yeah.
Honestly, I can't see a lot of difference. Oh, retelling fairy tales, I see. No, I would say that's a kind of fanfic. It is. This is what I mean. It's got this very bad reputation, but actually it's often a very, wholesome, creative, wonderful thing, even when it's not wholesome, in inverted commas.
Yeah.
It's still, it's true, as I said, that a large percentage of fan fiction is not well written. And a percentage of that is really badly written. You will all know this because you will have seen them. But within that world, it doesn't matter. And that is also something that I find wonderful, is that people who would never normally dare to write, would never normally get anything but sort of ridicule for their writing, are encouraged and applauded. And that's got to be good, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think last question, Sandra asked earlier, is it still a fan fiction when you use the existing world, such as Pandora or Middle Earth, but all new characters?
Yeah, that's the sort of mashup. That's a fanfic mashup, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, and I'm gonna. It's a completely off-topic question, Sal, but Diana's asked a couple of times. I can tell. Essentially, she's really desperate for an answer. So I'd like to answer this question. Diana's got 179,000 words in her first novel. It's 2/3 edited. She's concerned it will be too long for a debut. Should she continue editing or get professional guidance as to the length of the book?
I can give you professional guidance as to the length of the book right now. It's too long. There is a magic number and it's 100,000. And there are very, as you say, for a debut novel, if you're Hilary Mantel, you can get away with 100,000 billion word novels. and they'll be jolly good. But for a debut novel, 100,000 is absolutely the cutoff point, and there are very practical reasons for this. And you know, there are more sort of subjective reasons, like the agent thinking, "Oh, will people want to read such a big book?" Well, genre has got a lot to do with it. You can get away with a long novel with historical fiction easily, but still keep it to 100 if you can. But there's things like, honestly, paper weight. I don't mean like a paperweight that you put on a table, but the weight of the paper, the foreign rights, all sorts of really practical things come into agents and publishers thinking, I'm not going to invest in such a long novel when it might not sell because they're expensive to produce. It's you know, it can be literally that crude when it comes to it. So absolutely, without doubt, try and get it to 100,000 if you can. It's not from what you just said, you know, dramatically more. Well, it is a bit, I suppose, isn't it? But anything, if agents won't even look at it. A lot of agents won't even look at it if it's that long. So but really good luck with it. And indeed, you know, I feel I don't say this enough, all of you, really good luck with your books. Keep writing. The fact that you're all here is magic. The fact that you're all persevering is fantastic. And I really feel that I talk to people through these questions every month, and I just don't say that enough. It's wonderful what you're doing, and keep doing it, and good luck with it all.
Oh, it's great to hear, Sal. And no, that's a good point to mention the fact that we really appreciate the suggestions some of you gave us at the end of the last month's webinar for topics for us to cover. We're currently looking at those. If you've got any to add, please add them now to the chat or contact me later, because we're in the middle of kind of planning the next 6-month series of sessions. So we'd love to have your input on that. Barb, you've asked whether PWA is going to have another week-long genre like we've done in the past, a Crime Week and Fantasy Week. I forgot to mention this. There is a big announcement coming on the 1st of September. So you need to wait a couple more weeks, but we'll be announcing the next one on the 1st of September.
Tom?
Yeah.
I've just seen that somebody's asking for poetry, and unfortunately, you need somebody who really knows about poetry. I love reading poetry, but I'd love to do poetry and talk about poetry for an hour, but I can't do that. I'm so sorry, whoever asked that question. Well, I can't do sci-fi. Let's just get this clear now. Can't do sci-fi, can't do children's, as I've said several times. Look at my huge hands. And I can't do poetry.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sal.
They're so enormous.
Yeah, so maybe we need to find someone who can help with the poetry. But yeah, keep those suggestions coming. We will consider them all, but we'll also be very clear and honest about those you can't help with.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
No, thank you, everybody, one and all, for joining us once again. We love your company. We love your input. And as Sal said, keep on writing, keep on doing all that good stuff. We're here to help us as much as we can. Please do get in touch if there's anything else we can help with. Keep those ideas coming in. I'll keep the chat running for another minute or so just to keep those ideas coming in. And we will announce the sessions prior to our August webinar, prior to our September webinar, so you know what's coming up. I promise you that. Okay, have a safe and enjoyable rest of the day wherever you're joining from, and we look forward to seeing you all again in September, everybody.
Bye, everyone.